Everyone knows his name.
Oh, yeah.
Dominic Cummings.
Dominic Cummings.
Dominic Cummings.
Morning, Mr. Cummings.
Troublemaker. History maker.
Can you get the next?
They were no strangers to chaos. Pushing Boris Johnson on behind closed doors.
Why can't you be fired?
Yesterday I gave a full account to the Prime Minister of my actions
Until his own mistake exploded in public.
and ended up on the outskirts of Barncastle town. We did not visit the castle, we did not walk around the town.
He's never agreed to account for what he's done. Until now.
Mr. Cummings, you've never spoken like this before. Now, your story is, of course, completely interwoven with the Prime Minister's political fortunes. How would you describe Boris Johnson?
How would I describe him? In what way? You mean politically? You mean what does he believe politically, or?
As a leader, as a politician, as a human being, how would you describe him?
He's a very complicated character. He's unusual in a lot of politicians in having a sort of odd self-awareness mode, that he kind of knows in all sorts of ways that it's ludicrous for him to be in that position. He said that to me a few times before the referendum. He said it to me the day after, on the 24th of June in 2016.
He told you it would be ludicrous for him to be Prime Minister? He used that word?
Yes. Yeah. In a sort of jokey way, in a sort of, obviously it's ludicrous. It's 24th of June 2016. Obviously it's ludicrous for me to be Prime Minister, but on the other hand, it's kind of ludicrous that David and George are. David's Prime Minister, that's ludicrous. George wants to be Prime Minister, that's ludicrous. The whole thing is ludicrous. He has a sort of sense of the general sort of tragicomedy of the British political scene, and himself in it.
Why is it funny? Why is it funny to you that you helped put somebody into power who, in your own view, and you're telling us today in his view, it's ludicrous for him to be in the job?
So I didn't say it was funny.
You said it was tragic comic. You said it was ludicrous, or he was joking around.
Yeah, I'm giving you his perspective on it. He thought, he's a guy who makes a lot of jokes. That was his view of it. It's not how I would look at it. I've said for many, many years how terrible it is that these kind of characters are the ones that dominate party politics and power in this country. So from my point of view, it's not a laughing matter. But from his point of view, it was a laughing matter.
How do you see yourself?
How do I see myself? I don't know. What do you mean?
Well, how do you think others see you?
Generally as a nightmare.
What is this about for you now, though? A lot of people listening to you today might just think, this is revenge. You lost the influence in Downing Street. You lost the argument. You lost your job. And now you're angry. And so you're attacking. It's revenge, isn't it?
The reason why I'm speaking out is I want people to be thinking about these questions. How are we governed? How does power actually exercised in number 10? What sort of things should be more transparent? How should these power structures be opened up?
But you could be making, Dominic Cummings, all of those points about how you see Whitehall work, how you see government work, how concerned you are about structures. You could be making all of those arguments without trying to trash the reputation of other ministers, without being so personal. This is also revenge, isn't it?
No, it's not about revenge. It's about, and also, it doesn't matter if it's personal. It doesn't matter if people are upset. All these MPs or ministers or officials or whoever that might say, well, it's also difficult and also personal. We need more difficult conversations in this country. We need more people upset. A lot of people have a pop at me, but you don't see me crying about it.
So let's come on to COVID then. What was it like in Downing Street when you started to realise how serious this could be?
Well, it was obviously extremely frightening and also pretty surreal as well, because you feel like it feels sort of like you're in a disaster movie, but it's not a disaster movie, it's actually real. And you're looking around the room at the different people who are in key positions and thinking they're not the people that should be in charge of this sort of thing.
As it's my job to talk to people on all sides of the political divide, I remember talking to you at late February, and you mentioned the government was starting to make serious plans. At that point, it didn't seem that the Prime Minister was particularly involved in this.
No. At that point, he's still, I mean, remember, even in the first week of March, he was saying, business as usual and whatnot. He didn't take it seriously.
So what was the atmosphere like then in Downing Street? He didn't take it seriously at all?
No, he didn't take it. He didn't take it seriously. His view was, this is just like swine flu. I've seen these kind of scares over and over again. They're always nonsense. And his priorities and his concern were elsewhere.
But there was then a crystallization when one of your team said, actually, the numbers look much worse than we think. Basically, the government scientists' projections were wrong.
Yeah.
What was that like?
A very, very smart physicist who was helping the NHS with data came to me and said, it doesn't seem to me this plan has been thought out. Like, has this really been properly checked? This whole herd immunity plan is like a massive call. Are you okay if I go around and talk to people and think about this and look for plan B? I said, yeah, definitely do. As the days ticked on from there, it was increasingly clear that that the official plan was going to be a disaster. And it was me and a few other people, essentially it was me saying to the Prime Minister, vital elements of the system have got this terribly wrong. There is some kind of terrible bureaucratic fog and confusion, which means that people are not looking at the right numbers. Essentially, we'd said to him, the official plan is a disaster and we can't do it and it could kill 500,000 people.
And during that week, in some ways, the Prime Minister was trying to stick to routine.
Yes, he was. On the evening of Wednesday the 18th, the normal thing on a Wednesday evening is to go and see the Queen. And therefore he was going to go and see the Queen. So you could see the sort of complete craziness of the time. On the one hand, everyone's saying, there's this deadly disease, we've got to lock everything down. On the other hand, it's kind of partly, well, we just carry on as normal. And at the same time, you still have the cabinet and other people still meeting face to face as well. Things haven't made that kind of physical shift.
But what happened then? Because obviously the health advice was already, especially for the very elderly, people should take every precaution. You shouldn't be doing things that you're not meant to be doing. You should be trying to reduce all your contacts. So what happened?
I said, what are you doing? And he said, well, I'm going to see the Queen. And I said, what on earth are you talking about? Of course you can't go and see the Queen. He said, well, that's what I do every Wednesday. Sod this, I'm going to go and see her. I said, I really don't think you should do that. Look around this office. As we spoke, we were in the outer office just outside his study. It was basically empty, partly because people in that office were isolating at home with symptoms. So I said to him, there's people in this office who are isolating. You might have coronavirus, I might have coronavirus. You can't go and see the Queen. What if you go and see her and then give the Queen coronavirus? Obviously you can't go.
So the possibility went through your head at that moment that the Prime Minister might pass coronavirus to the Queen?
Yes.
How did you persuade him not to do it?
I just said, if you go and you give her coronavirus and she dies, what are you going to... You can't do that. You can't risk that. That's completely insane. And he said, he basically just hadn't thought it through. And he said, yeah, holy shit, I can't go.
Downing Street says that didn't happen. What do you say to that?
Well, they've officially said that that didn't happen. Well, I know it happened and other people who were there know it happened.
There's then a period where the Prime Minister falls ill. You, of course, eventually follow. Let's talk about what you've already admitted was a terrible, terrible mistake. That you didn't tell the whole truth when it was reported that you had left London at the beginning of lockdown to go to County Durham. So now's the moment. What really happened?
Well, so when I spoke in the Rose Garden, I didn't go into all the details of it for various reasons. Essentially what happened is that I'd had repeated security problems at my house going back to 2019. These problems had re-emerged, and I was in discussions with the Cabinet Office in March about the situation. They suggested maybe all of us moving into government accommodation. I'd said maybe, but maybe I'll just move them all off to my dad's farm in Durham. We talked about those different options. I talked to the PM about that and also to some senior officials about it. My wife is kind of ill, but not with the kind of official symptoms exactly, but has she got it, has she not got it? So then you had the combination of security problems, which meant anyway we were going to get out.
Of course, when this emerged, though, and the public realised that one of the most senior people in the government had left lockdown at a time when people were unable to go and see sick relatives, they were unable to do their jobs, they were unable to be with their families. There was enormous public rage. Why didn't you just tell the truth at the time?
Well, the situation was it was extremely chaotic situation.
But you decided not to tell the truth. You didn't have to give a press conference in the Downing Street Rose Garden tell the story.
Well, that was not at all the original plan, of course. The original plan was, when I discussed it with the Prime Minister on the Saturday and the Sunday, was, given he knew what had actually happened, he agreed we should just say nothing about it. The media will say whatever the media's going to say. There's all kinds of conspiracy theories buzzing around. We'll just ignore it. What then happened on the Monday is that he suddenly changed his mind and said, we can't stick with the original plan. You're going to have to explain it to people. I said, I'm not going into all of the security stuff. And the whole thing just became just a huge mess.
But so together you agreed that it was better for you to tell a story that wasn't true than to stay silent.
Everything that I said in the Rose Garden was true.
But it was not the whole truth, not near it.
But I did not, everything I said was true, but I didn't go into all of the security concerns in the background, no.
It was a very different story, Mr. Cummings. It was a very different story. You and Boris Johnson decided it was better to give the public, many of whom were absolutely furious with what you had done, you decided together it was better to give the public a story that was not the 100% truth than to keep silent, or even for you to resign.
So as I said,
that would have made it go away.
I think there's absolutely no doubt that the way we handled the whole thing was wrong on the Monday. What I should have done is either just resigned and said nothing about anything, or I should have spoken to my family and said, listen, we're just going to have to come clean about the whole thing.
Is it really the truth that you put your wife and child in the car, having been seriously ill, to drive some miles up and down the road to check that you could see? Is that really what happened?
So what happened is that, at that point, obviously, the country was in an absolute terrible situation. The Prime Minister had nearly died. Everything was chaos at Number 10. I had everyone on the phone to me saying, can you come back? Can you come back? It's chaos down here. I was thinking about going on Saturday, but I was still too ill. On the Sunday, I was thinking, okay, am I going to drive back down there? Now, it may seem odd, but at the time it didn't seem odd at all to say, okay, if tomorrow you're going to drive 300 miles back from Durham to London, today go and drive up and down the road and see how you feel about the whole thing.
Doesn't that kind of stretch credibility, though? I mean, you've admitted you didn't give the full story at the beginning. But wasn't it actually that you'd been cooped up? It was your wife's birthday. You'd been all very ill. Suddenly, actually, you have a chance to go out for the afternoon, get some air. Is it really about testing your eyesight? People should believe that now.
Do I feel okay driving If you can't drive 30 miles and feel okay, then you know that you're not going to be able to drive 300 miles the next day, right? It was as simple as that.
But the fundamental truth here is that one of the most senior people in the government ignored the strict rules that were governing the country's behaviour. Do you understand that? Do you feel that people might see you as having been a hypocrite? You set those rules.
Of course I understand that the people were upset. But as I said, in terms of my... You said that I ignored the rules. With respect, that's not the case. I was not ignoring the rules. Remember, I've been discussing about the security problems repeatedly for months with Cabinet Office officials, and it was just accepted that if I thought that family needed to be moved for security reasons, that it was reasonable to do so regardless of the coronavirus situation.
Let's talk now about then the next phase of the pandemic. So through the summer, the country was very significantly opened up. Cases had gone down again. And then at the start of the autumn through September, they started to tick up again. It appeared that the virus wasn't done with us. What was your attitude at the time to what was going on?
Well, a fundamental problem was that in the summer, the Prime Minister's attitude was that essentially the first lockdown was a disaster. We should never have done it.
He thought we should never have done the first lockdown.
He said we should never have done the first lockdown. He said that repeatedly in meetings in Number 10. After the first wave passed, and then after he came back to work, initially his view was essentially, thank goodness we did do that. But very quickly, as the Telegraph and various parts of the media and the Tory party started screaming, he then basically reverted and said, actually, the whole thing was a disaster. We should never have done it. I was right in February. We should basically just ignore it and just let the thing wash through the country and not destroy the economy and move on.
I remember talking to you as I talked to people in senior positions in government and in the opposition parties too. And at the time, there was a discussion of the so-called circuit breaker.
When you get to the week of round about the 15th to the 19th of September, by that point, the data was clear about what was happening. And Patrick Vallance and Chris Whitty came to Downing Street and said, it's clear where this is going. We think that you should consider hitting it hard and early. And this said, no, I'm not doing it.
To be completely clear about what you're saying, that by the middle of September, you, Chris Whitty, Patrick Vallance, other people in the government are trying to push Boris Johnson to bring back restrictions. And you're saying he was refusing.
Essentially, yes. It was because a combination of Starmer had said it should happen, and therefore the Prime Minister felt it would be politically disastrous for him just to suddenly admit that Starmer had been right. Secondly, he had a bunch of Tory MPs screaming at him. Remember, some of those Tory MPs, similar to the ones on Brexit, had lost their minds and were saying all kinds of complete fake news about COVID. And third, he had the Telegraph, who he always referred to as his, quote, my real boss, unquote. So he had those three things all pushing him not to act.
Sorry, the Prime Minister calls the Telegraph his real boss, you just said. What evidence?
And the Telegraph, of course, was extremely hostile to doing anything.
So are you suggesting that the Prime Minister of this country calls the Telegraph newspaper that he used to be a columnist for, he calls them his real boss?
Correct.
It was a joke?
It's often hard to tell with the Prime Minister quite how much of what is a joke, but what he should have done is listened to the advice from the data people at that point and acted. He shouldn't have been listening to a bunch of pundits in the Daily Telegraph talking nonsense.
By the middle of October then, this debate is still going on. I mean, the Prime Minister decided not to do that circuit breaker, a short, sharp lockdown. Cases continue to go up. You're saying now you were making the case very strongly in government, but he was still resisting. What was he saying by that point?
He was essentially just sort of hoping that something would work out. But also, his attitude at that point was a weird mix of partly it's all nonsense and lockdowns don't work anyway, and partly, well, this is terrible, but the people who are dying are essentially all over 80. And we can't kill the economy just because of people dying over 80.
It's a very serious claim to make. What evidence do you have of that?
Well, lots of people heard the Prime Minister say that. The Prime Minister texted that to me and other people. When the inquiry happens and everyone has to give evidence under oath, like other things that I've said to you today, this is not just me saying this. Many, many people will say under oath to the public inquiry, if and when that ever happens, that what I've said today is true.
Do you think Boris Johnson was therefore putting politics ahead of people's lives?
Certainly he did. He put his own political interests ahead of people's lives, for sure.
That's a very serious accusation to make.
Yes, but lots of people were in the room and saw the same as what I saw. That's why I've argued so strongly for why I think that MPs should take matters into their own hands and insist on an inquiry into all of this now.
You've had a very prominent and influential role in lots of things that have happened in this country over the last 5 to 6 years. If we go back 6 years, David Cameron had just won the election. You're sitting in your garden, having a beer, reading a book. The phone goes. Someone says, "Will you come and run the referendum?" Do you ever wish you'd just let the phone call go to voicemail?
No, there aren't moments where I wish that's the case. There are definitely moments where I've thought about it hard and thought, did I do the right thing? For sure. I thought hard about whether or not it was the right thing to do the referendum. I think if you're someone like me making these kind of judgments, you're a complete idiot if you think that you're definitely right about them. No one knows. None of us know anything, right? None of us know if any of these things are right or wrong.
You sound pretty sure about many of things you say there.
Well, I can be confident on judgments like, is so-and-so up for the job, or is so-and-so extremely able or extremely rubbish. Those sort of things, I think I've shown good judgment on over the last few years. But questions like, is Brexit a good idea? No one on earth knows if that's what the answer to that is.
But you've just said today, even you are still not sure if Brexit was a good idea.
I think anyone who says they're sure about questions like that has got a screw loose, whether you're on the Remain side or our side. I think one of the reasons why we won is precisely because in Vote Leave we didn't think that we're definitely right and Remainers are all idiots or traitors or anything else. We never thought like that then and still don't, and I don't now. I think it's perfectly reasonable to say that Brexit was a mistake and that history will prove that. Of course, it's reasonable for some people to think that. I honestly don't know what sort of person you'd be if you didn't have a view like that.
Do you think that you've been a force for good, or do you think you've done damage to the country? I mean, during the time where you had prominence and influence, the country became very divided and our politics became more brutal.
I think that Brexit was a good thing. I think that the way in which the world has worked out since 2016 vindicates the arguments that Vote Leave made in all sorts of ways. I think it's good that Brexit happened.
Let's talk then about some of the issues that you talked about and the content of the campaign. Now, you said you were prepared to act as outsiders from the start. You were also prepared to be quite provocative, and no more so perhaps than when it came to the £350 million a week that you told the public was being sent to the European Union, and instead it could be spent on the NHS. Now, let's just establish, you knew very well then, and you know very well now, that that figure did not include the so-called rebate, the money that the UK got to keep.
Yeah.
Now, you used that figure deliberately and misleadingly, didn't you?
I wouldn't say misleadingly, but yes, we did use it deliberately. Essentially, you have a powerful government that just won the election and had a very powerful ability to control how the media reported the campaign. And we tried in various ways to talk about various issues and were struggling in some ways to discuss things the way we wanted to. And the point of using that really was to try and to try and drive the Remain campaign and people running it crazy.
So it's a deliberate trap for the other side.
Yeah.
But wasn't the important thing what you were saying to the public?
No, I don't think so. I think that
Wasn't it important what you were saying to the public?
I think that in doing that, it helped everyone discuss what is the balance sheet. What's the true balance sheet? The reason why that figure worked, and the reason why it drove everyone crazy, and the reason why people are still talking about it now is that we were using true figures.
You used true figures, but gave a misleading impression to members of the public. I mean, do you admit now you weren't trying to get members of the public to think about the whole balance sheet? You were trying to get members of the public to see 350 million on the side of the bus and for them to believe
with respect, that's not
that was a real figure.
With respect, that is not correct.
But the slogan, Dominic Cummings, did not contain the whole truth. And I can see today, you're almost laughing thinking about it now, because it was a campaign tactic which did exactly what you wanted, but it did not give. In that slogan, the side of the bus was not the complete truth, was it?
I think that if the worst that can be said about a political campaign is that they used actually real figures, unlike normal political campaigns, but it needed more context to understand it all, then I think you should go back to what Michael Gove said at the time about it, which is that Vote Leave has been more honest in its campaigning than any political campaign he could remember in his lifetime.
And one of the other ones you tried to use to grab the agenda was the possibility that Turkey was going to join the EU. Now, to remind people, it was the case that Turkey wanted to join the EU. It was the case that many countries in the EU wanted Turkey to join one day, but it was not the case that Turkey was anywhere near joining the EU, and yet you made it one of the main issues in the campaign. And you even linked that distortion of reality to the possibility of making it easier for terrorists to come to the UK.
So again, the reason I think why the Turkey issue annoyed the Remain campaign so much was because Turkey was in the process of joining the EU and had been for many years. So like with 350, they couldn't just say, this is nonsense, it's not the case. The Prime Minister himself had given a speech in which he said, I want Turkey to join as soon as possible and I want to pave the road from Ankara to London.
But you knew that it was nowhere near something that was imminent. You knew that very well, but your message to the public was that it was imminent, just as your message to the public in that tight, narrow slogan about the 350 million was that that money was all going to the EU. Now, Turkey was not about to join the European Union. We were not sending £350 million a week to the EU and getting nothing back.
We didn't say it's about to join, we said it's in the process of joining, which it was.
But they were distortions of reality for voters. There are two different things here. There's one thing, using information to wind your opponents up, to drive them round the twist, which you did successfully, which so clearly amuses you now. And it's quite another thing to be honest with the public and to be honest with voters. Did you win on false pretenses?
No, I don't think we did win on false pretenses. I think the arguments that we made about the weaknesses of the European Union, about the problems, about the costs, about the future dangers of it, I think were vindicated.
Do you remember the moment you realised that you'd won? Where were you? What were you doing? What was it like?
Yeah, it was in the kind of early hours of the 24th, and our data team said, we're going to win, for sure.
What did you feel? What did you think?
I don't know, I mean, I'm not a sort of hugely emotional person about things like that, so I was like, well, that's good. I mean, I was pleased for the country. I thought it's good for the country. I thought that millions of people's lives are going to be better as a consequence of it. Yeah, that's what I thought.
And did you think at that point then that Boris Johnson was going to become the Prime Minister?
I thought, yeah, sort of. I thought that, so I'd negotiated between him and Michael Gove a deal over the previous couple of weeks about what to do in this situation. And the deal essentially was that that Michael did not want to run in the leadership contest, that he would be Chancellor, that Boris would be Prime Minister, but that we would create a certain kind of number 10, and that we would very rapidly deliver on the promises that the Vote Leave campaign had made during the election, during the referendum campaign.
So you negotiated that deal?
Yes.
Why was it up to you? And how did you choose that it should be Boris Johnson to be Prime Minister, not Michael Gove?
Well, I didn't choose that, just that they were both thinking about these questions.
And after the referendum, why did you think Boris Johnson deserved to be in charge?
Well, I didn't think he deserved to be in charge in one sense. It sort of depends what you mean, but I just thought it's probably going to be one of Boris or Gove, given what's just happened. It's almost definitely going to be someone who supported the Vote Leave campaign in order to implement the result. Seemed like a reasonable thing to assume at the time.
And what did you think of Boris Johnson at that point, having worked alongside him in the referendum campaign?
I thought he had some abilities in various ways, also kind of completely hopeless in other ways.
If you felt he wasn't up to it, as you clearly did, why on earth then was it the right thing to push him to be Prime Minister? Why was that the right thing to do?
There are many, many people I know personally who I'd much prefer to see in number 10, but that wasn't a practical possibility for me. I also thought that precisely because Boris knows that in lots of ways he obviously shouldn't be Prime Minister, he knows that he needs help, he knows that he needs to bring in various people to help him, that also provides an opportunity to push the country in a much more positive direction.
What you're saying, he was so useless that you were able to get him to do what you wanted?
I mean, partly, yes. Or that he didn't know what he was doing, but he did know that he needed help.
But can you hear yourself say that? That the man that's Prime Minister, who's been chosen by the Tory party, and then was elected by the voting public, well, it was great for me because he was so useless in some ways, in your view, that it meant that you could get him to do what you wanted. Well,
I think it's terrible for the country, but I keep trying to stress, you've got to balance up the different possibilities. Is that objectively a good thing for the country? No, it's objectively obviously ludicrous. That's why I've made the argument repeatedly for all kinds of political change, and why actually it was a difficult decision in summer 19. We spent a lot of time calculating, maybe we should just let the Conservative Party go down the toilet. Maybe that would be the best way out, because then it could rebuild something new. Because why are we in the situation with this terrible choice between Johnson and Corbyn? But from a practical matter, all our options were bad, right? So it's like, which is the least bad option? Well, the least bad option seemed to be exploit the current situation to try and push certain things through and get the country into a better position.
Who's
Will you help
us? Who's we?
Well, me and a network of people some of us who did the Vote Leave campaign, some of us who did other things.
How many of you? You make it sound this kind of secretive clique. Who?
No, I mean, it's...
Half a dozen? A dozen?
A few dozen, maybe.
So you're sitting here today and saying there's a few dozen people who were involved in the Vote Leave campaign who basically made the choice, for the country, about who the Prime Minister ought to be. But if you were clear in your mind that Boris Johnson was not fit for office then, which is what you've said today.
Yeah.
What about the rights of voters who you were campaigning to, saying, elect this man. He should be in charge of our hospitals, our schools, our security. What about the rights of voters to know that, if that's really what you believed?
Well, first of all, I was extremely explicit many, many times over years about the fact that I thought that the senior leadership of the Conservative Party, including Boris Johnson, were not the right people to be running the country, and that profound change in this country is needed. So whilst a lot of people, you could make that accusation about a lot of people, and you could accuse me reasonably of various things. I don't think that's a reasonable accusation to throw at me. I did say repeatedly, the party system throws up people who do not know what they are doing. So I think I was extremely clear, so clear about that that it's made me extremely unpopular throughout the Conservative Party.
So, as people will remember, Boris Johnson's campaign is then blown up by Michael Gove wanting to run himself.
Yeah.
Theresa May ends up Prime Minister, has a terrible time. This political situation becomes more and more fraught, the atmosphere more and more toxic. She eventually goes. You, at this point, have disappeared from the political fray. You were out of the fray for quite a long time. But in 2019, you were tempted back to work in Number 10, but Boris Johnson's just won the Conservative leadership contest. How did that happen?
I'd been abroad. I'd just flown back from abroad on the Sunday before he became Prime Minister, and he texted me and said, "Can I come and see you?" I said, "Sure." So he arrived at my house, and he said, "I'm going to be Prime Minister on Wednesday. The country's in a terrible situation. No one has a plan for how the hell we get through this. We could very easily be in a situation where there's a second referendum, Jeremy Corbyn is Prime Minister, Conservative Party destroyed, etc., etc. Will you put together some of your royal team and come into Number 10 and try and somehow help sort this out?"
And what did you do? You did a deal, didn't you? What was the deal?
I said, maybe, but only if we agree on certain key things. Those essentially were, are you actually serious about sorting out the Brexit thing? Point one. Point two, do you agree on some fundamentals about where the country should go next? In particular, the science and technology agenda, really trying to deal with kind of core productivity problems in the country, and also reforming Whitehall, the civil service structure. So if you're deadly serious, then I'll come, but if not, not.
And what did he say?
He said, "I'm deadly serious, I agree with you, deal."
It's curious listening to you, because this man, Boris Johnson, was in a matter of days about to become Prime Minister, and yet you were the one calling the shots. He came and said, "Please come and do this for you," and you said yes, but only if you danced to my tune.
What's your question?
Do you think that's a good situation to have been in?
No, I mean, I think it's from the country's point of view, I think it's obviously a terrible situation. It's a terrible situation that the choice is Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn. What the hell does that say about how our political system works?
But do you ever listen to yourself saying that? This man is about to move into Downing Street. He says, "Please come and be part of my team. I think we have an important job to do." You say, "Yes, but only if you do exactly what I ask you." Don't you think to some people that would just sound unbelievably arrogant?
Why is that?
The man's about to become the Prime Minister. If you had a sense of public service, of wanting to do the right thing, surely many people in that situation would have thought that's a privilege, an honour to be asked to go and work for the country on behalf of 70 million people that live here.
Yeah, but you're also dealing with someone who I knew, and therefore it's a moment where you can exert some leverage over what direction the country's going to go in.
But you're very clear that was your point of leverage. So were you using him? Or did he want to use you? Or was it...
Well, I think obviously both of us are using each other.
But if you listen to yourself, don't you think that sounds rather extraordinary?
Well, I think the situation is extraordinary, but I think it's, we don't live in a monarchy where the king just commands people to turn up and do what he wants.
Dominic Cummings commanded Boris Johnson to do what he wanted.
He's asking me, will I come and save him from what he thinks is going to be disaster? He's asking me to give up a very happy life to come into an extremely unpleasant environment. It's very bad for my family in all sorts of ways. I mean, I think it's reasonable for me to say that, yes, I'll help, but I'm only going to do it if you're actually serious about having a serious agenda.
So by the time you and Boris Johnson arrive in Downing Street, the political atmosphere was completely toxic. What was your strategy once you got there?
Well, it was to say to Brussels, we can either do a friendly deal or we'll leave with no deal, but we're leaving.
But in terms of the Brexit strategy, you set on a course, just as in the referendum campaign, of provoking the other side. I mean, provoking people even further. You know, you suspended Parliament. You've even written yourself, keep bulldozing, prorogue, refuse assent, whatever. We're entitled to use extreme measures. Why was it acceptable to take the kind of what you've described yourself as extreme measures, throwing Tory MPs out of the Conservative Party, the Supreme Court finding that the government had broken the law? Why was it acceptable to be so provocative?
Well, we did provoke, but I think the provocation is a byproduct. The core thing was we were trying to solve the problem and show people we were trying to solve the problem. Was that provocative? Yes. Did we lean into that in various ways to try and disorient the people on the other side? Yes. But that's what, you know, that's politics. There wasn't some like kumbaya happy way in which everyone could just sit down and go, well, let's all just do a friendly deal and compromise and blah, blah, blah.
But what followed ushered in an era of division in this country that we hadn't seen for decades.
No, the people I blame for that are the people who tried to overturn, who didn't accept the result of the referendum.
But you're sitting here today and saying that all of the division, tension, anger, upset in this country that followed the mess of the referendum campaign, all of that is on those people who were involved in the Remain campaign. None of that is down to the fact that you provoked the other side as much as you possibly could in number 10. You suspended Parliament. You threw MPs out of the Conservative Party. You're saying it was all on them.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that's the fundamental reason why there's two fundamental reasons why the problem came. One is that a lot of powerful elements of the establishment refused to accept defeat. And the second is that the leadership of the Conservative Party was fundamentally useless. And Whitehall couldn't cope with the negotiations. And those two forces combined pushed the country into a cul-de-sac. Another contributing factor was that a lot of MPs on my side of the debate were also absolute morons.
So your relationship with the Prime Minister was already breaking down then?
Yes.
By autumn 2020?
Yeah. By summer 2020.
Why was that? And what happened? And why did you then finally walk out so dramatically in the darkness, clutching a cardboard box full of your belongings? What happened?
Well, it was a mix of things. I think that, first of all, he was fed up with the media portrayal of him being a kind of puppet for the Vote Leave team, was driving him around the bend.
From what you've said today, it sounds like it was pretty accurate.
Secondly, he was upset about the fact that I was spending my time on what I thought was important, not on politics, not on media and communication and campaigning stuff. I was spending my time on the science stuff, on the defence review, with the intelligence services, procurement reform, all of those kind of things, and on COVID. Push it through.
But hang on, you say he was upset because I didn't want to do what he wanted me to do. He was the elected Prime Minister. You're an unelected advisor.
Yep.
But listening to you, it seems as if very clearly in that relationship you saw yourself as the superior.
No, I'm not saying that I'm a better person than him or anything else.
That wasn't my question, but you said, well, he didn't have a plan and I'd had a plan, so why should I have paid attention to what he wanted me to do?
I think that I had a plan. I was trying to get things done. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have an agenda. No, the Prime Minister's only agenda is buy more trains, buy more buses, have more bikes, and build the world's most stupid tunnel to Ireland. That's it. Also, he knew that we'd basically disagreed about what was happening on COVID, and he knew that I was blaming him for not having acted in September, which I was. And I thought that his girlfriend was interfering with appointments, people who were she wanted to have people fired and she wanted to have people promoted in ways that I thought were unethical and unprofessional. And that also led to a big argument between us.
What's your evidence for that, though? Because again, that's quite a claim to make. You're saying that Boris Johnson's then fiancée, now wife, was interfering in proper government process. What's your evidence for that?
Yeah. Well, the most obvious evidence is what happened with the whole Prime Minister's official spokesman, where there was a whole official process that was gone through to hire an excellent young woman who then essentially, after months of this process happening, it was all just thrown in the bin, and the person who the Prime Minister's girlfriend wanted to be appointed was just suddenly appointed. Me and others said, this is completely not how, this is just a completely hopeless way for things to be run. And that led to a lot of tension.
So you've talked a lot publicly about the influence of the Prime Minister's wife. You've made it very clear that you didn't agree with her on lots of issues. But what kinds of things are you talking about? It's very easy to throw an allegation saying, well, she does this and she does that and she pushes him around. Because accusing somebody of having undue influence, which is what you're doing, that's a big claim.
Carrie's view was and is, the Prime Minister doesn't have a plan and he doesn't know how Whitehall works. Someone is going to set a lot of the agenda. It can either be the civil service, or it can be Dominic and the Vote Leave team, or it can be me. In 2019, her view was better that it's Dominic and the Vote Leave team than the civil service, because that's the route to winning and staying in number 10. As soon as the election was won, her view was, why should it be Dominic and the Vote Leave team? Why shouldn't it be me that's pulling the strings?
But the picture that you paint here is essentially that you and Carrie Johnson were rivals for the Prime Minister's heir, that he somehow isn't up to making any decisions himself. You've just suggested she doesn't think he's got a plan. I mean, it's the most extraordinary situation that you portray.
Sure is, yeah. Extraordinarily bad situation.
But in the end, you lose the argument. You lose that influence. That's what happened, isn't it?
Yeah. In fact, literally immediately after the election, it was already clear that this was a problem. Before even mid-January, we were having meetings in number 10 saying, it's clear that Carrie wants rid of all of us. At that point, we were already saying that by the summer, either we'll all have gone from here, or we'll be in the process of trying to get rid of him and get someone else in as Prime Minister.
But you've just said that within months of the Prime Minister winning the biggest Conservative majority in decades, you and a few others from the Vote Leave campaign were discussing the possibility of getting rid of him.
Days, not months.
Within days of the election, you were discussing getting rid of him.
Yes. Well, for all the reasons we've been discussing. He doesn't have a plan, he doesn't know how to be Prime Minister, and we'd only got him in there because we had to solve a certain problem, not because we thought that he was the right person to be running the country.
Well, what kind of con had you just pulled off on the British public then, if that's really what you think?
Well, it's not. I don't think it's a con. We're trying to solve very hard problems in the order that we can solve them in.
There's nothing wrong with running an election campaign, presenting one thing to the public, saying, he's the guy for the job, and then days after the result comes through, you then, unelected officials inside government, discussing getting rid of him. That's okay?
Well, I'd say that's politics.
Doesn't that make you actually a pretty treacherous kind of person? You know, when he hired you, plenty of MPs, some of his old friends, some ministers who thought that you would be, ultimately, you would be dangerous to him. Haven't you just proved that they were absolutely correct?
In some ways, of course, yes.
See, I think, Dominic Cummings, some people will be listening to you saying you were discussing getting rid of Boris Johnson. I think some people will listen to you saying that and just wonder who you think you are.
Possibly, but, that's the situation. The situation we found ourselves in is that within days, we were in a situation where the Prime Minister's girlfriend is trying to get rid of us and appoint complete clowns to certain key jobs. So do you just go, OK, that's fine? Or do you say, that's a disaster, we should try and avoid that happening?
Do you think normal people think it's OK for a group of unelected people to discuss getting rid of a Prime Minister within weeks of him being elected with an enormous majority? Is that OK?
I think lots of people would think, we're glad that people are thinking about how to improve things. You can say all sorts of things about us, but we actually have some pretty good judgment about who's competent and who's not competent. We thought we should be thinking about, if he gets rid of us, what then? If there's going to be a reshuffle,
Who do we try and get promoted so that the situation improves in the country? That you don't just have Fundamentally, you try and promote various talent.
So if he was the problem, what was the solution? And who was the solution?
Well, I think at the heart of this, at the heart of all of these problems, I think are three big common elements. Problem one is that you've got political parties as gatekeepers in the system, and all the incentives that operate within that essentially are for MPs to think, how do you climb the party hierarchy, not how do you serve the public? And if you want to escape the problem that we all have had for year after year of watching this thinking, they're all useless, it doesn't matter who you vote for, next bunch of clowns come in, it's the same old thing. We have to address those two closed power systems.
You wanted to rewire the whole system.
Yeah. The party system needs to be broken and opened up, and the Whitehall system needs to be broken and opened up. And we've seen what happens when these closed systems rattle around left to their own devices.
How would you then describe the way you did go about trying to make changes?
Because depends which ones you mean.
If we're talking about Whitehall, because there is a widespread perception that you were combative, you were provocative. Some officials were, I think it's fair to say, were scared of what was going on. Senior people lost their jobs. Mm-hmm. Cabinet ministers, even Andrea Leadsom, went on the record to say she thought that you bullied people. Is that all wrong, that perception?
I think it's just much more complicated than that. People were dying, so there were some very tough conversations. To give one obvious example, back in March 2020, I was sitting around the cabinet table to be told by various officials from Hancock's department, well, none of the PPE for the NHS is going to get here till the summer. Why? Why till the summer? Well, because that's when it will be shipped over. What do you mean shipped? Well, we ship PPE. Why do you ship PPE? Because that's what the rules are. That's EU procurement rules, it's Treasury rules on value for money. I did have some very tough conversations. I said to people, leave the room, call the airlines, we're hiring the planes, they're flying to China tonight, they're flying stuff back, forget the rules. I'll write from the Prime Minister's office saying the Prime Minister will take legal responsibility for ditching all these rules.
Do you think your behaviour was always acceptable?
I think my behaviour was the behaviour that you would see from someone who is trying to get crucial things done with thousands of people dying at speed and at scale in a rotten bureaucracy. Does that mean some conversations are tough? Of course it does. But does that mean that someone has to prioritise and say no and do things, particularly when you've got a Prime Minister who's a shopping trolley? Yes, it does. But a lot of the duffers inside the system do feel threatened by changes like that.
But just listening to you today, it sounds like you divide the world very clearly into two groups of people. One group, which agrees with D. Cummings' analysis of the world and all its problems, and the need to do radical things, perhaps by using provocative extreme measures. And then the other group of people in the world who don't share your views, who are either, as you've described today, morons or duffers or useless. You seem to have this very binary view where people either agree with you, in which case their views are valid, but basically everyone else can go away. It doesn't matter what they feel, it doesn't matter what they say.
No, I think you're confusing two different dimensions. I think when it comes to do people agree with me about things like Brexit or policy questions, I'm very much not like that, quite the opposite. My view is there's very little that I actually know very much about. I'm open to all kinds of disagreements about things. And if you're trying to do very hard things, especially in a pandemic, or if you're trying to deal with things like what's the institutional machinery for dealing with war and terrorism and things like that, then my view is we should be very, very aggressively trying to get into position these very rare people who are times 100 or times 1,000 smarter, more able than the norm into those crucial positions. That is, I agree, that is a controversial view in various ways, and it is controversial in political parties in Westminster.
What needs to happen though then? You talk about regime change. What is your solution? Are you planning to do something about all of this?
I'm thinking about what could be done, yeah, for sure, of course. Possibility one, you can set up some kind of new party, a party to end the existing parties, to kill them off and create something different. You could try and do a sort of version of what we did essentially, i.e. take over an existing party and try and bend it to something that's different.
So you're plotting something that would take over from the government?
No, I wouldn't put it quite
Well,
like that.
that's what you've just said. You said think one of the things you're thinking of is creating an entity that could take over from government and do the things that governments are incapable
So
of.
I'm not saying that I personally should be the person doing this. I'm talking logically what are the different possibilities to create different kinds of networked power in the world that can do things without necessarily having to directly go and control the existing parties now or the civil service. So you either have to take over one of those parties or create a new one that displaces them, or create some other kind of entity which then ends up kind of assimilating or disrupting that power.
So you're not done.
Sorry?
You're not done.
Well, I mean, as I say, at the moment, I'm just talking to people and thinking about things. So I think clearly there are opportunities to build something which can actually solve problems for people outside of the existing current power structures.
Is it part of your plan to hasten him out of Downing Street?
Certainly, I think the sooner he goes, the better, for sure.
And are you doing things to try to make that happen? Are you actively trying to... What are you doing?
Well, as you can see, I'm explaining what went wrong, and also I think it's a sort of there's an irony in it in that if last summer he'd gone down the route that he started to go down, which was the system's failed, let's be honest about the system failing, and let's rebuild it, remove people, create new things. Unfortunately, for a whole set of reasons, he's decided not to go down that route. He's decided to go down the route of essentially completely inventing. And the people like me who know what happened have a duty to speak out and tell people the truth about what actually happened in there. Not because it's revenge, which is what you're suggesting, but because if we don't learn, history tells us the same disasters will happen again.
When did you last speak to Boris Johnson, or when were you last in touch?
The last time I spoke to him was the Friday that I left number 10.
No contact since then?
He texted me a couple of days later saying, would I speak to him? And I said no.
Do you think you'll ever speak to him again?
Don't know.
You want to?
It doesn't bother me one way or the other.
In response to Mr. Cummings' claims, Downing Street told us, since the start of the pandemic, the Prime Minister has taken the necessary action to protect lives and livelihoods, guided by the best scientific advice. The government he leads has delivered the fastest vaccination rollout in Europe, saved millions of jobs through the furlough scheme, and prevented the NHS from being overwhelmed through 3 national lockdowns. The government's entirely focused on emerging cautiously from the pandemic and building back better. Political appointments are entirely made by the Prime Minister.
Well, next on BBC Two, on a hot night like this, which items at the V&A could potentially melt? Back for a new series with Secrets of the Museum.